First of all, we have to understand that Israel is a very technologically advanced military power. They have their own indigenous military industries that are populated by extremely intelligent and capable engineers, scientists, and technicians. They are backed up by the United States and its collective military industrial capacity. And again, we have some of the best scientists, engineers, and technicians in the world. So when you pour enough money into such a well-staffed military defense, infrastructure, you're going to produce capable weapons. And the air defense system that Israel has produced is designed to protect Israeli population centers and Israeli strategic military targets based upon Israel's understanding of the threat arrayed against it. But you can only build weapons. Christopher Cavoli, the commanding general of American forces in Europe and also the ground commander of NATO forces, when speaking about the Ukrainian conflict back in early 2023, said that the scope and scale of the violence that was taking place on the battlefield exceeded the imagination of NATO. That NATO couldn't imagine that. And that's important because how do you prepare for war? What the planning that you do, the weapon systems that you build, everything is premised on imagining what the future conflict will look like. You say, what is my enemy going to do? What capabilities do they have? When you deal with military technologies, especially something like ballistic missile defense, you are sort of limited to the reality as you understand it. No one's going to spend a whole lot of money on concepts. They'll do research and development on concepts, but when you field a system, that system is supposed to perform to certain parameters. Those certain parameters have to be related to reality. And so the Israelis and the Americans are finding themselves where when you initially conceive of a need, to give you an example, the Israeli Iron Dome grew out of 2006. And the experience in 2006 when Israel was flooded with Katyushka rockets and other low technology missiles being fired by Hezbollah. There was no defense for this. And Hezbollah was able to rain these missiles and rockets down on Israel throughout the entire, 33-day conflict in August 2006. And the Israelis said, we can't allow this to happen. So we need a defense against this threat. And so they built the Iron Dome, and the Iron Dome is predicated upon a threat model that has relatively unsophisticated rockets and missiles coming at them in large quantities over a period of time. And on the surface, it's a fairly effective system. I mean, we've seen it get flooded with missiles coming out of both Lebanon and out of Gaza, and we've seen the fireworks in the skies as they go off and they intercept. The radar is sophisticated because it can do predictive analysis of where things are going to impact to prioritize, intercept missiles that look like they're going to impact on the ground in the desert away from human life. They don't waste a missile on. They strike the missiles that are heading towards populated centers. And for the most part, Iron Dome performed. It performed based upon a employment and deployment strategy of Israel, where the weapon would have the greatest impact against the threat models arrayed against it. But again, those are existing threat models. Two things happen. Well, then we also know that the Israelis have put together the Arrow system, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, and they have David Sling. We know that they've incorporated advanced models of PAC-3 modifications of the Patriot system. We know the United States has deployed the THAAD, the intercept system there. We've brought in our Aegis capable ships that use SM-3, SM-6 interceptor rockets. The Aegis uses S-band radars. The THAAD uses an X-band radar that we've brought in. The Israelis have their own radar capabilities, and we've integrated these all into a singular ballistic missile defense, structure, system. And while we'd like to believe that the true capabilities of the system are classified, they are for people like you and I. For foreign intelligence services and the intelligence services of non-state actors like Hezbollah, like Hamas, they know everything there is to know about this. The Israelis test it. The testing is detected. The Israelis publish reports about this. It's detected. And the Iranians are on top. The Iranians have some of the finest technological capabilities in the region. In some cases, they exceed that of even Israel and the United States. I want to remind everybody that it was Iran, after all, that intercepted the satellite, guidance of the Beast of Kandahar, an advanced stealth drone that we operated out of Afghanistan. After years of tracking the operation of this, the Iranians broke the code on how we passed off control of the drone from ground control station to a satellite station. Took control of the drone in the air and landed it on the ground. That's not your average Boy Scout merit badge project. This is something of far more capability. The Iranians are very good. And so the Iranians are advising Hezbollah, they advise Hamas. The Iranians have their own ballistic missile development. And so, what happens when you invest so much money into a ballistic missile defense structure, like the Israel and the United States did, is it rapidly gets outdated as missiles advance. And it's very expensive once you've built something to go in and modify it. The modification of existing system is not something that is easily done, and it may lead to a breakdown in how the system works, how the system coordinates, etc. In short, what Israel has built is the modern day equivalent of the Maginot Line that the French built at the end of World War I to stop German attacks. But the Germans said, well, we're not going to go through the rolling plains of France. We're going to go through the Ardennes forest where the Maginot Line doesn't exist, and we will outflank it, get behind it, and now it's useless. As every time Hamas and Hezbollah has fired a salvo against Israel, they have done it to study the Israeli response. When the Iranians launched their massive multi-wave attack, they did it with an eye on studying the Israeli allied response. How do they respond? What are they doing? And I think what we're seeing now is that both Hezbollah and Hamas have found seams in the Israeli defense, and the way Israel has laid out its defenses. They found the seams. They've adjusted where they launch from. They found the right angles. They found, different operational characteristics. Maybe if you fire your missiles at a shorter range using a less of a ballistic trajectory, the radars get confused. I'm just speculating right now on some of the things that can be done. Different approach models. If you vary the height and the direction of a drone, can it confuse the system? They've tested it out and they've found weaknesses, and you see them exploiting these weaknesses. And I think you're going to see exploitation like this further. The Iranians, they've been studying this. The Iranian attacks, I think people need to focus less on the delivery system and more on the warhead itself. The Iranians did not use their best missiles. Those were kept in strategic reserve for the next follow-on strike. What Iran did use, though, are warheads that separate from the main body of the missile, warheads which employ decoys, which confuse the living hell out of the Israelis, and warheads that used accelerating warheads, meaning that you separate from your ballistic missile, you deploy decoys out to confuse the system, and then as all the Iron Dome and other missiles adjust to this new flood of decoys, your warhead has a propellant charge on it, and it accelerates through because the entire system got focused on one problem set, was busy doing, remember I told you the Iron Dome picks targets? So now you got the computer going into the pick target mode, and all of a sudden, in comes an accelerating target that the computer cannot adjust to. It's already been programmed to do this. It can't readjust. They didn't keep a system in reserve. And wham, the warhead comes through. It maneuvers at the end just to provide one last level of defense against any potential man pads. And bam, hit the target within 5 meters of what it wanted to hit. There are some that appear to be accelerating warheads. There's others that appeared to be taking out Iron Dome defenses that employed decoys, and then the maneuvering warhead. You can see the warhead at the end make at least 2 adjustments, but that's after it accelerates through. You can even see as the warhead comes in, you see the decoys deployed, and you can see the glow of the warhead as the decoys get in front of it. And then as the system is adjusting to it and starts to fire the interceptor, you can suddenly see the acceleration of the warhead through the decoy shield, making 2 maneuvers and hitting. The warheads that struck the Nevatim airfield, I think may have been fired from a different system, and may not have employed decoys, and may have just employed an accelerating maneuverable warhead. But again, until I can travel to Iran and interrogate the Iranian military planners, we won't know for certain. And I doubt they're going to let me interrogate them. Maybe they'd let me have a conversation with them. But, the point is, the Iranians put a marker on the table that said we can reach out and touch you anytime we want to, any place we want to, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. And that's a signal that wasn't just sent to Israel, but to the United States as well. Understand that the Israeli technologies that they put together for this ballistic missile defense system are the exact same technologies the United States uses in the Pacific to protect South Korea and Japan and Guam. The same system the United States has superimposed on Europe to protect Europe. And what Iran just did is prove that any nation with a ballistic missile capability, especially one that incorporates maneuvering warheads or effective decoys or self-propelled accelerating warheads, hypersonic missiles, that there is no missile defense system in the world now that can stop this. And that all the money the United States and Israel and its allies have poured into ballistic missile defense has been money that has been literally flushed down the toilet. There's 2 aspects to this. One, Iran has exposed the Israeli ballistic missile shield to be porous. And Israel, again, when I used to work with the Israeli intelligence on ballistic missile issues. And at that time, we were focused on the Iraqi Scud problem. And the Israelis have a team of technical intelligence people who gather the debris and put it together in what they call the missile graveyard, excuse me, or boneyard. And I've been taken there, excuse me.
Take your time.
It's the danger of doing so many interviews that my poor, pathetic voice gives out. I'll try and find the appropriate tone that doesn't challenge my vocal cords as much. But no, I've been to the boneyard. I've seen the missile parts. I've worked with them as they, with the Israelis as they assess every aspect of it. And they're very good. They're very good at what they do. They were able to read into the debris, facts about Iraqi ballistic missile development that the Iraqis have been denying to us as inspectors. And so by going to the boneyard, working with Israeli intelligence officers, we were able to get an understanding that empowered us to go into Iraq and sit down with the counterparts. And when I would listen to their story about missile development, I would say, well, you're lying. And they said, well, why? And I said, well, and then I'd say, because the ring that joins the warhead here can't meet with the body, you had to do an adaptation. And they're looking at me going, how the hell do you know this? And the answer is because the Israelis are pretty good. And the reason why I bring that up is that I believe the Israelis have gathered the debris of the missiles that attacked. And while Israel may lie to the world, the Israeli intelligence officers are not lying to their leadership. And I believe the message they have sent their leadership is that the Iranian missiles can't be stopped by our existing missile defense capabilities. And that if Iran were to flood Israel with these missiles or missiles of similar capability or better capability, that a lot of damage would be done to Israel, and there's not much we can do to stop it. And that's a wake-up call to Israel. Now, Israel has a way of dealing with that, which is called overwhelming military response. Basically, to get engaged in a war of attrition with Iran that would wear Iran down before it would wear Israel down. The problem is the plans that Israel has assembled for that. They've been tested in the last 2 years in joint military training exercises with the United States. Even after the training exercise, when Israel could best case everything, there was a recognition that they could not meaningfully interdict either Iran's nuclear program or their ballistic missile programs. No matter what, they couldn't do anything without the United States. That the United States had to be a partner in this, a leading partner. And what happened in April, after the Israelis attacked the Iranian consulate, provoking the Iranian response, is that the Iranians called up the United States and they called up America's allies in the region and said, we'll reach out and touch you too. We'll send you a special delivery package that will annihilate your air base and American forces on there, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And this wasn't just rhetoric, because the United States, in the aftermath of the assassination of Qasem Soleimani back in January of 2020, this precipitated an Iranian response. Up to 10 missiles were fired against the Al-Assad air base. Each one hit its designated target with a level of precision that sent a clear signal to the United States that we hit what we aim at. There's nothing you can do to stop us from doing this. The goal of the Iranians wasn't to inflict casualties. It was to send a message to the United States that you don't get away with this again. So Iran actually, in January of 2020, established deterrence dominance over the United States. A lot of people don't talk about it because it's uncomfortable to talk about, but the United States from that moment on had to be very careful in what it did in terms of military response, because if it triggered an Iranian response and the United States sought to strike Iran proper, the results would be devastating for the United States, as they would have facilities struck with missiles that the United States can't defend against. So the Iranians had already achieved deterrence dominance over the United States prior to this April event. Israel continued, the United States, however, continued to let Israel believe that we were behind them 100%. Not because we were trying to provoke them into attacking, but we were trying to have Israel operating from a position of strength that maybe would restrain them. But after the Iranian attack, the Israelis had to respond. And politically, they wanted, I believe, to respond with a decisive strike against Iran. But again, a decisive strike against Iran requires American tankers to refuel aircraft. It requires American fighter protection for those tankers. It requires American electronic warfare capabilities to pave a way into Iran, and sustained American combat strike capability to assist the Israelis, so that the Israelis could send a strike package in, drop a bomb on a location, they'd send a strike package out. Even then, if everything worked, at the end of the day, Israel and the United States didn't have the ability to blanket the Iranian target deck, and the Iranians will still retain the ability to strike back. And for the Americans, that meant that they would lose every base in the Middle East. And for the Israelis, that meant that they would suffer casualties amongst critical targets that were unsustainable from an Israeli political perspective. So the United States told Israel that, look, you can retaliate, but we're not going to be with you. And that meant to the Israelis that they really, what can they do? Because any retaliation they did against Iran proper would never be sustainable and would only open them up to an attack they already knew would succeed. They know the Iranians would succeed. But they had to do something because, politically speaking, Netanyahu's government wouldn't survive if it received the Iranian attack and wasn't seen as conducting some sort of retaliation. And so the Israelis did launch a strike. I believe it was two F-15 aircraft, each armed with two existing missiles of a type Israel has already used several times against Syria. And they fired these missiles into Iran to strike a target near Esfahan, an air defense radar target. Whether or not they successfully struck that or not, I don't know. The Iranians claim that nothing happened. Who knows? This is now we're getting into a game of perception management, you see, because Israel did this attack. It didn't acknowledge it. It didn't brag about it, but it did it in a way that Iran knew that Israel fired missiles against Iran. But it was done also in a way that Iran said, well, nothing really happened. And so, and Iran also said that was the most pathetic response I've ever seen in my life. It wasn't a real response by Israel. It was a face-saving gesture by Israel. And the Iranians were very happy at that point in time to say, we're going to call it a day. We've already made our point, and the Israeli response proves that they received the point we were trying to make. Iran has established deterrence dominance over Israel. Israel will not be able to strike Iran in the future, either directly on Iranian soil or Iranian targets in Syria, Lebanon, and elsewhere, until which time they have built a defense capable of stopping an Iranian retaliation, or they've assembled offensive strike capability that can launch a viable, sustainable military strike against Iran, independent of American military involvement. Right now, neither of those conditions exist, which means Iran has achieved deterrence dominance.